everyone. Great to be here with you all. Rather intimate room, so I'm happy to engage with any questions or discussions afterwards if we have time. But basically, I would like to address the question of what does space exploration look like from an African perspective? If all goes to plan, US and partners, as well as China and partners, will be setting up camps at the lunar South Pole by 2030. So what does all of this look like from the perspective of people living in Africa? So my story with space goes back even before 97, but back in the 90s, kids would make paper mache school projects, no competition for the kind of robotics and IoT and coding that kids do nowadays. But as my mom has pointed out, thinking about power, air, water, food, city life, etc., on the planet Mars is something I'm still thinking about today. So let's go back and get in the mood for space. I mean, we are in space. If you saw the beautiful sunrise this morning, or any of the stars in the night sky, you'd be reminded that we're on a rather repetitive loop around our sun. And for those of us who've dreamed of adventures beyond orbit around our sun, perhaps some of you heard about the Mars One project back in 2015. So there were, in fact, 7 Africans who volunteered for this mission, and the mission did not proceed, needless to say, because the launch date was last year. But let's get in the mood and watch this pretty good video that they put together at the time.
I want to go to Mars not just to be a part of history, but to inspire people around the world.
The colonization of Mars is the adventure of the century.
This is our chance to get the world excited about space again.
If we can look up from Earth and know that human beings are living on another planet, will we ever again be able to tell ourselves that there's anything we can't do?
I want to contribute directly to mankind's confident expansion into the solar system, which we have to do if we're going to survive in the long term.
I believe it is in our nature and it is our destiny.
I want, after I die, the impact of my life is imparted upon those who follow.
I know it comes at the cost of living Earth forever, but future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams.
So yeah, I was amongst those 100 people selected for the trip to Mars. The company did declare bankruptcy, did not manage to raise the $4 billion, which probably wouldn't have been enough to pull that off. But it did get a lot of people talking, a lot of people realizing they may have friends or family who have volunteered to go on this trip, or maybe were volunteered to go on this trip. But let's dive in and see how things progress since there. So from an African perspective, what does our visualization of the development to be taking place on the moon look like? And like many of us, children in Africa looking up at the night sky, you know, what kind of opportunities are we providing on the continent to work and contribute and expand our horizons in the sphere of space exploration? So one such child that I need to mention is the founder of the Foundation for Space Development Africa, Dr. Carla Sharp-Mitchell, my dear friend and collaborator. And back in 2009, she established the Foundation for Space Development Africa, which is actually 1 year before the South African Space Agency was established. Her story, very briefly in a nutshell, is that she traveled to the Isle of Man in 2009 to become the first cohort of International Space University EMBA graduates. On a wing and a prayer, as she would say. She stayed in a friend's garage, sharing a single bed with her young son as a single mother. She worked as a tea lady in a marketing company where she later became director. But as she says, on a wing and a prayer, she managed to graduate in 2010, paying for the EMBA in rand and foreign currency. We all know the challenges of that. And then became the only graduate of this program to come back to South Africa, where she realized our closest activities to space itself were, at the time, South Africa had just won the bid to co-host the SKA, the Square Kilometre Array Radio Telescope, here in the Northern Cape, with Australia and other African partner states. And along with the already successfully acquired data, that Meerkat, the precursor array to the full SKA, which is still under construction. This picture was taken by Meerkat. It's the most highly resolved image ever taken of the center of our Milky Way galaxy there. The colors obviously adjusted a bit. That's the supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way. And there's so much data in this image alone and others that it will occupy researchers for decades to come. So a great achievement for investment in infrastructure in South Africa, besides all the PhDs and expertise and skills that were generated in so many different sectors, the amazing science that's already come out of that project. So Carla, hanging out with the engineers and scientists building the SKA, was privy to conversations and came up with one of her harebrained schemes, as she would call it, which is let's put a radio telescope on the moon. Okay, she's not the first person to come up with that idea, because the moon is actually a great location from which to do radio astronomy. Firstly, because on the surface of the Earth, low frequency signals below around 20 megahertz are interfered with by our atmosphere and ionosphere. So if you want to look between 0 and 20 megahertz, you need to go beyond Earth's atmosphere. Secondly, if you go to the far side of the moon, you have your back towards Earth, all the natural and technological emissions of the Earth, and periodically the sun. So in fact, the far side of the moon is one of the perfect locations in the solar system to do radio astronomy from. So Carla came up with a concept of her balls, and ever since she's been trying to get them to the moon. So there have been lots of jokes made about the balls, so we of course made it into an acronym because we needed it to stay. And those are bounced African lunar low spheres, low frequency, low mass, low cost, and ball-shaped. Okay, Carla's balls are not actually that big, but I'll get to a more accurate diagram of what they look like in a moment. So where do I come in on the picture? This is astronaut Katie Coleman. That's the former chief scientist at NASA, Dr. Ellen Stofan, visiting the Cape Town Science Center run by Julie Cleverden back in 2015. I eavesdropped on Carla's conversation and wanted to use the SKA data for my research into the origins of life and the building blocks of life in space. Anyway, we became great friends, and as the joke goes, what do you get when you cross an economist? I didn't say. Carla's actually an economist. I'm not a radio astronomer or an engineer. What do you get when you cross an economist looking to positively impact lives in Africa through space technology with a quantum biologist looking to life on Mars? And Africa's first moon mission is obviously the answer, but we'll get to that. For many people, a moonshot is an impossible dream, but for us, the moon is really a stepping stone or even a compromise for our grander visions throughout the solar system and beyond. But in this era, everybody's directing space exploration resources and extraction thereof towards the moon, so we followed suit. 2018 in Bremen, we were talking about our various projects at the IAC, so that's the biggest space gathering every year, which forms a thread for our developments and our partnerships through the years. But looking at the chronological steps, okay, so in 2019, a lot of things happened, including the Mars One project declaring bankruptcy. So I was one of the 100, preparing potentially to leave Earth any moment now, last year, in fact. I must say I'm both disappointed not to be living on Mars, but also mostly probably very happy to still be on Earth, working with all you lovely people. So 2019, Mars One made it to the Big Bang Theory, South Park, The Simpsons, but not to Mars, unfortunately, and declared bankruptcy in 2019. So for myself, thinking about the training of teams and the selection of teams to be traveling to the moon and Mars and beyond, established Proudly Human at that point, thinking that water management in the desert, energy management in polar regions, oxygen and atmospheric management under the ocean, as well as looking at data around the selection and performance of different teams and combinations of experts in these truly extreme environments would produce the data sets essential for future exploration of the moon, Mars, and beyond. And in 2019, in December, I managed to get to Antarctica on a location scout for the project. We were planning to overwinter at the Witchaway camp, but I think you know what happened next. Lockdown kicked in early 2020, and so Proudly Human's dreams really focused on international collaboration, international travel, and living and working and doing experiments in faraway places kind of came to a halt. And so this video is around 3 minutes long, but people, I think, always enjoy watching it. So what did Proudly Human pivot to during lockdown? Well, off-world lockdown. Looks a bit like this. And I play this video because having been in the previous sessions, looking at food security, water management, power management systems, I think these are the critical challenges of our time. We can talk about computing, we can talk about AI, we talk about quantum computing, but essentially we're still sitting with the same basic challenges, which are infrastructural development and access to resources. And by the way, if we are living on the moon, Mars, or beyond, or we are living in refugee camps, conflict zones, overcrowded CBDs on Earth, in fact, the requirements for human communities remain the same. Shelter, power, water, food, communication systems. Without this basic infrastructure, communities of humans can thrive nowhere. And in that way, we see, as an African-based space technology organization, massively important parallels between the kinds of robust, efficient, cheap technologies that sustain life beyond Earth and the kinds of technologies that we can roll out to remote communities on Earth, or even in overcrowded CBDs, for example. Okay, so we're not going to obviously build with wood on the moon or Mars or anywhere in space, and many of the architectural choices we made here were really based for building in the forest. So this is our structure, you'll see it coming up. What about power? Well, there was not enough sunlight down there to actually use solar panels, unfortunately, so we had gas heating for water, gas cooking. We even baked bread in our gas oven, which we had to obviously carry down that hill. That's the only way down, the one that you just saw. That wasn't edited, so that's the full walk. Power, eventually we got a generator. Actually, fuel, surprisingly, fossil fuel is quite an efficient way to generate energy in remote places. Obviously not suitable for space, though, but we did implement that. For water, we luckily had a clean river flowing past, mostly clean. You have to maybe drink less than a liter per day, otherwise you reach the threshold of bacteria. But we did collect rainwater as well, and we could boil water for people with sensitive stomachs. Food, I must say, we got from Checkers, but thinking about carrying all the food down that hill made us reconsider resources in a serious way. We did collect some sort of medicinal plants and other things from the surroundings. So lessons, take-homes from this project, I would say humility. Firstly, living with the creatures who are the normal inhabitants of this area. We interfaced with the troop of monkeys that would come through every day, the baboons that would come past regularly, the otter, the wild boar, snakes, birds, chameleons, all sorts of animals that we lived down there with. But then also the humility to know that this was an exercise for us, a project, an off-world lockdown experiment with building infrastructure from scratch and living in a resource-constrained environment, that this is the daily, in fact, this is far better than the daily reality that many billions of humans have every day of their life, which is lack of access to reliable power, clean water, nutritious food, and reliable communication systems. So it was an exercise, I think, in mental strength, in knowing your limitations, understanding your resource consumption, like can you carry the amount of water you use per day, how long does it take to heat that water, that kind of thing on a very practical level. But mostly we didn't want to be locked down in the city, and so we spent 25,000 Rand building that cabin so that we could live without regulations down in the forest, and we had many fun braais and parties down there during lockdown, or shouldn't I say that? So, coming out of lockdown, we had to rethink our approach. The Mars mission was off. It's going to cost a lot of money. Even Elon and people at SpaceX are talking about moon first. So we realized at the Foundation for Space Development Africa that we would need to put our effort behind Carla's balls and get them to the moon however we could. So we sat down in Franschhoek, and you can see the reason we needed a bottle of wine for this conversation was because we looked at the budget for our lunar telescope. So, in fact, no one has fully successfully deployed a radio telescope on the moon to date. The US attempted and was not fully successful. China attempted and was not fully successful. So, in fact, if we could pull this off, we would stand in line to be implementing the first ever radio astronomy experiment on the surface of the moon at the time. But the cost, okay, look at that, $1.4 billion, Rand. You would probably say you would need a few more bottles of wine to deal with that, but let's go along the story. So the major game changer came with the call for payload proposals with the Chunga 8 mission, the Chinese National Space Administration's program, put out 200 kilograms of volume on the payload for international contributions to experimental apparatus. So the foundation applied, and we gathered some of our team. This was back in 2024. After we submitted our letter of intent, there are many more people involved living in South Africa, Africa, or abroad. But we basically managed to get our team of experts to volunteer their time. So the vast majority of people, individuals, volunteered their time 100%. But we have to thank also Sansa and Soraya for giving us some hours of some key people that are employees currently at the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory and the South African National Space Agency. But as I said, the majority of those are people who dedicated their time voluntarily to advancing African space exploration through contributions to our program. So judging by my face, this might have been the meeting where we lost one of our balls. So we did have 4, castration down to 3, the Chinese driver hard deal. We had 4 for redundancy. They said, well, if you need 3 for the minimum array, then that's what you'll get. So we dealt with a lot of updates to key kind of mission aspects during the process, but there in the back you can see the beginning of the design of the balls. So many design missions, analysis on the capabilities, so that's probably a bit small, but we're aiming to look at the Earth, at the Sun, at the galactic background, and the lunar surface itself at the low temperatures not visible from the surface of the Earth below 20 megahertz. So more adjustments. We also heard that our balls would no longer be inside the lander, as you might imagine, in the comfortable, maybe relatively warm area of inside the lander. No, we were told our balls would be strapped to the outside of the lander, dangling free in space all the way to the moon, which is around 20 to 30 days. So we had to make more adjustments, and at this point realized we need to bring on precision manufacturing partners. And we are hugely appreciative and excited to be working with Petrowell and ASRI, Aerospace Systems Research Institute, based out of UKZN, which have sponsored essentially and are partnering with us to do the precision manufacturing required to deliver our initial prototypes and coming with us on the journey. So we've got the budget down slightly, more announcements. Probably this was the meeting where our balls were strapped to the outside of the lander, and we realized our space-grade components are going to be a big part of the cost. But again, we are extremely excited to have Electronic Systems Laboratory out of University of Stellenbosch engineering department on board. They are experts at building components for more orbit-based space technologies, but are assisting us with our EPS, our power supply, our batteries, etc., for both the prototypes and the space-ready versions, so that we've got that cost down to 9 million. That's because some of our components cannot be manufactured in South Africa, and the European partners we approach are not as maybe collaborative as the people we approached in South Africa, who worked with us on a partnership level. So we'll still need to come up with the 9 million for those components from international companies. A lot more meetings. Testing, okay. The temperatures at the lunar South Pole are amongst some of the harshest in the solar system. Temperatures plummet below negative 200 degrees Celsius. These are not temperatures dealt with in Earth orbit or in previous lunar exploration missions. In fact, we've never been to the lunar South Pole. So not only would our Africa2Moon project be looking at conditions in a place we've never been that we plan to send crew to, that's a whole other discussion, but did you already watch that video? Dipping our resins, etc., in the negative 200 degrees Celsius liquid nitrogen is a good way to test for stability. But luckily we do have test facilities and partners on board also, so thanks to Hotech and Soraya, who will be helping us both to test and to integrate our different components, as well as the University of KwaZulu-Natal Engineering to help us with cryogenic temperature testing and other things. Okay, and then a big step for us was in 2024 when the Chinese team came to Cape Town to visit us. This is Professor Pei, who is the chief engineer of the Chunga 8 mission. He was actually with us on Monday again back in Cape Town. Maybe I'm jumping ahead then, but Carla and I then reciprocated by traveling to China in 2024 and signed on with the foundation as partners on the Chinese International Lunar Research Station. So our non-profit private foundation is also a partner on the future Lunar Research Station. And I'm going to run out of time, but let's make sure we get to this video, because here's the announcement.
International guests from the space sector will have witnessed a series of significant announcements made by the China National Space Administration at the China Space Day celebrations in Shanghai. The CNSA also unveiled the 10 projects from 11 countries and regions, as well as one international organization, have been selected for the Chunga 8 mission cooperative program.
It's a big day for us. I'm very excited and even struggling with my words. It has been 11 years to get to this point.
We are preparing Africa's first mission to the moon, which today was announced to be traveling to the lunar South Pole region with the Chunga 8 mission with the CNSA. So what I'd like to emphasize in the minus 10 seconds I have left is that through collaboration, through the power of collaboration, what began as an impossible moonshot has turned into a very feasible project that we are already most certainly en route to, and confident that we'll raise the remaining 10 million rand, what's that anyway, compared to the 1.4 billion that we started with. Thanks to the generous, collaborative-based approach to space exploration, which we've not seen in the past few decades of space exploration from the other powers that be, lending hands to assisting through their vast infrastructure and extremely reliable launch services, countries who would never have had the opportunity to participate in lunar exploration are now part of it. Chunga 8 alone has Thailand, Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, Hong Kong, Russia, Italy, South Africa, Bahrain, and Egypt together, so we are the all-African mission, but Egypt is also participating with Bahrain. So here are the balls in all their glory. They're 30 centimeters diameter each, in case you're wondering. And hopefully this is what lunar exploration looks like from an African perspective, with Carla's balls sitting pretty on the surface of the moon at the South Pole. Thanks again to our partners, especially Juicy, who's making us an amazing website worth having, again, on a pro bono partnership basis. And we hope that children in Africa who look up at the night sky are not inclined to leave the continent to pursue their dreams, but through our very small step for the continent, but hopefully opening up a pathway for others to follow suit, we believe that through the power of collaboration, passion-driven projects like ours can make it even to the most extreme places in the solar system, namely the lunar South Pole. The much longer story can be found in my book. Thank you.